Imagine working day and night, without recognition, without pay, just to survive. This is the story of Nina, a quiet dishwasher in a bustling restaurant who was invisible to everyone. Until one day, a chance encounter with the CEO changed everything. From exhaustion and hardship to becoming the heart of a cultural revolution in the kitchen, Nina's journey is one of resilience, courage, and the power of being seen. Curious to find out how Nina's story unfolds? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like hers. You won't want to miss what happens next. The kitchen buzzed with the chaotic sounds of pots clattering, water hissing, and the steady hum of refrigerators. In the far corner, unnoticed by the bustling staff, stood a lone figure, Nina, the dishwasher. Every day, she arrived before anyone else, leaving long after the last person had gone home. She wore the same apron, day after day, her hands stained with soap and sweat, her eyes cast downward. No one really saw her. The chefs and waiters moved in a rhythmic dance, carrying trays, chopping ingredients, and calling out orders, but Nina was nothing more than background noise. She didn't join the chatter, didn't laugh at the jokes. She ate her meals alone, far from the rest. She was just there. For 6 months, Nina had been part of the scene, working tirelessly in the shadows. Yet, she never complained. The other employees didn't pay much attention to her. They had their own lives, their own problems. And Nina, well, she just had the dishes. The only thing she needed. One evening, as the last customer trickled out of the restaurant, a man in a sharp navy suit walked in. He didn't belong in the kitchen. His posture, his presence, too composed to be a delivery guy, too observant to be a casual diner. He stood at the door for a moment, arms crossed, eyes locked on Nina, who was absorbed in her task. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched. This man was Richard King, the CEO of the entire restaurant chain. He wasn't supposed to be here. His company was spread across the country, and he'd built it into one of the biggest dining empires. But Richard was tired of the filtered reports, tired of only hearing what his managers wanted him to hear. So, a year ago, he'd started an initiative, visiting his restaurants unannounced. No entourage, no schedule, no heads up. Just him and his sharp instincts. This restaurant was number 4 on his list. His plan was simple, a 2-day visit to observe and gather notes. But something felt off. Something, or rather, someone, was different. Nina. The manager had said she was just helping in the back, not officially on payroll, and didn't want payment. Richard felt his stomach twist. How could someone work here for months without any record, without any acknowledgement? He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept returning to Nina, the girl who seemed invisible, who worked with no complaints, no recognition. And yet, there was something in her eyes that made him uneasy. Something that felt wrong. Richard came back to the restaurant early the next morning. He stood quietly in the kitchen, watching Nina from the corner. She was already there, scrubbing trays that hadn't even been used yet. The room was silent except for the soft swish of the sponge against the metal. Her movements were smooth, almost mechanical. She worked as though it was the only thing that kept her going, her hands moving in the same practiced rhythm. There was no joy in her eyes, only exhaustion. The other staff began to filter in, punching in their time cards, laughing, talking. Nina faded into the background. No one seemed to acknowledge her presence. Richard casually approached one of the chefs, trying to get more information. "Does she ever take time off?" he asked. The chef shrugged. "I don't think she can afford to." He didn't look up, just continued chopping vegetables. Richard's stomach turned. How had no one noticed? How had no one cared? He moved on to ask the manager directly. "Who hired Nina?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The manager looked uncomfortable. "No one, really. She just showed up one day, asking if she could work for food. I needed help in the back, so I let her stay. She's quiet, doesn't cause trouble. I never saw a reason to say no." Richard was stunned. For months, Nina had been working without pay, without any official status. She wasn't even on the payroll. No records, no contracts, nothing. Richard's mind raced. He couldn't understand how this had been allowed to happen, how no one had seen the injustice. But he didn't say anything. Instead, he waited. That night, long after the kitchen had closed, Richard walked back into the restaurant. He found Nina still there, scrubbing away at a stack of dishes, the room thick with steam. She didn't even notice him enter. "You're still here." Richard's voice broke the silence. Nina flinched, startled by his presence. "Sorry, just a few more pans," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard stepped closer, his gaze softening. "You don't get paid, do you?" Nina paused, looking up at him for the first time. The weight of her silence was almost too much to bear. "No," she finally said, her voice steady but tired. "I don't." Richard swallowed, his heart aching. "Why do you stay?" he asked, his voice quiet. She didn't meet his eyes. "Because I have nowhere else to go." Nina's words cut through Richard like a knife. The rawness in her voice, the quiet resignation. It was as if she had been holding everything inside for far too long. She wiped her hands on her apron, avoiding his gaze, her shoulders hunched, trying to shrink into herself. In that moment, she opened up. Slowly, she began to share her story. How her mother had died of cancer the previous year, how she had dropped out of culinary school to take care of her, how the bills piled up and the weight of the world pressed down on her. She told him how, one night with only $2 to her name, she had remembered this place, the restaurant where she had once interned in high school. She didn't come here to beg, she came to barter. Dishes for food, work for a place to rest her weary soul. Richard stood motionless, stunned by the story unfolding before him. He didn't know what to say. His mind raced with disbelief. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? How had the system allowed this? Nina didn't ask for pity. She didn't expect anything from him. She just wanted a sink, soap, and somewhere she could escape the world for a little while. Richard turned and left the kitchen without a word. But as he stepped outside, his mind was made up. He wouldn't let this continue. He would change things. The following week, the restaurant was abuzz with rumors. Staff whispered among themselves about Richard's visit, unsure of what had transpired the night he'd spoken with Nina. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The media swarmed the front of the restaurant on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Reporters lined up with cameras, eager for a story, but not the one they were expecting. Richard stood behind a podium at a press conference, his sharp suit contrasting with the soft tension in the room. He looked every bit the powerful CEO, but his voice carried an unexpected storm. "This is Nina," he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction as he gestured to the young woman standing beside him. "For 6 months, she worked in one of my kitchens without pay. She did it without complaint, without recognition, and without being seen. But I saw her, and I failed her. We all did." A murmur rippled through the crowd, disbelief filling the air. The truth had been laid bare. Richard didn't hide behind corporate jargon or polished speeches. He took full responsibility for what had happened under his watch. "In a world where people like Nina slip through the cracks," he continued, "we don't just need policies. We need eyes that see, ears that listen, and hearts that act." Richard's words hit home like a wave crashing against a cliff. He didn't just address the injustice. He promised real change. From this day forward, every employee across all 86 restaurant locations will be automatically enrolled in an emergency housing fund. Each branch manager will receive crisis response training. And a new culinary scholarship will be created in Nina's name for students who, like her, have potential but no support. The room went silent. Every eye was on Nina as Richard turned to her. "And Nina," he said, his voice softer now, but firm, "you are no longer just a dishwasher. You are our first culinary fellow. You will have full benefits, full pay, and a full ride to finish your culinary degree if you still want it." Nina stood motionless, her eyes wide, but she didn't cry. She nodded quietly, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. In that moment, Nina was no longer invisible. She had become the face of change. As the weeks passed, Richard's announcement had a ripple effect. Across the country, other restaurants began auditing their kitchens, reevaluating their treatment of staff, and reconsidering the systems that allowed people like Nina to fall through the cracks. Richard's decision had sparked something bigger than just one woman's story. It had sparked a movement. But for Nina, the real change came in the form of her own personal transformation. She didn't leave the kitchen, but she no longer carried the weight of invisibility. She was no longer just the quiet girl in the back. She was Nina, the first culinary fellow, someone who had earned her place in the world, not through asking, but through enduring. She worked harder than ever before, but now it was for herself. Her apron, once faded and worn, was now clean. Her posture, once slouched from the weight of the world, was straighter. She stood tall and proud, not only as a worker but as someone who had been seen, recognized, and given the chance to thrive. The new trainees who walked into the kitchen noticed something different about Nina. She greeted them first, her voice no longer quiet but full of strength. She didn't just wash dishes, she taught them, showing them the ropes, ensuring they felt seen and appreciated. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to scrub dishes in silence, to feel like she didn't belong. Now, she made sure the new trainees didn't feel the same way. Every time she welcomed them with a smile, she knew she was doing more than just teaching them how to cook. She was showing them that they mattered. Nina's story spread across the company, and the restaurant's culture began to shift. Managers became more aware of the struggles their employees faced, and the training programs Richard had introduced began to make a difference. Employees felt safer, more supported, and more valued. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about creating an environment where people could work and thrive without fear, without shame, and without being invisible. But the most beautiful part of all? Nina never left the kitchen. She remained in the very place where she had once been nothing more than a background figure, a shadow in the hustle and bustle of the restaurant. Now, she stood as a beacon of change, silent, but loud in the impact she made. Richard's initiative didn't stop there. As the program expanded, more employees like Nina received opportunities for growth, more chances to be seen, and more support when life got tough. It wasn't just about fixing the problems in the kitchens. It was about fixing the broken systems that had allowed so many to slip through the cracks. In the months that followed, Richard and his team began working on new initiatives for all their employees. Better healthcare, better work-life balance, and most importantly, better opportunities for those who had been left behind. And through it all, Nina continued to shine, not because she asked for recognition, but because she had earned it through every day of hard work, silence, and strength. She had endured, and now, she would lead the way for others to follow. As the restaurant chain implemented the changes Richard had promised, the shift in culture became more than just a set of new policies. It was a movement that slowly began to change how people saw each other, how they treated one another. Nina, now a symbol of resilience, found herself stepping into a new role, one she had never imagined. In the kitchen, she no longer worked in isolation. The new culinary fellows, the trainees who had once been as invisible as she had been, now looked up to her as a mentor. She guided them with patience, offering advice and sharing her story of struggle, not as a tale of sadness, but as one of perseverance. It was strange at first, this newfound sense of purpose. Nina had spent so much of her life in the shadows, doing her best to stay out of the way, to remain unnoticed. But now, she was at the center of a transformation, and people were looking to her for guidance. She felt a sense of responsibility she hadn't known before, a responsibility to show these new faces that they too could rise above their circumstances. One afternoon, as she helped a young woman chop vegetables, Nina noticed the familiar signs of exhaustion in her eyes. The same tiredness she had once felt, the weight of a life that seemed to offer no rest. She placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "You're doing great," Nina said quietly. "Just keep going. It gets better." The young woman nodded, grateful for the encouragement. And in that moment, Nina realized that she wasn't just washing dishes anymore. She was washing away the loneliness and uncertainty for someone else, just as she had once longed for someone to do for her. Across the country, the changes Richard had set in motion were starting to be felt in every kitchen, every restaurant. The Emergency Housing Fund became a lifeline for many employees who had struggled with housing insecurity. Crisis response training empowered managers to act swiftly when an employee was in distress, and the Culinary Scholarship Program gave many talented students a chance to pursue their dreams, just like Nina had once dreamed. But the most profound change wasn't in the policies or the programs. It was in the culture of the restaurants themselves. The work environment was no longer just a place to clock in and out. It had become a community, a place where employees felt valued and cared for. The walls that had once been silent and cold now echoed with laughter, with shared stories, with the hum of people working together toward a common goal. Richard watched from the sidelines, quietly observing the transformation he had set in motion. He knew it wasn't perfect, that there would always be challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt that his company was truly becoming something more than just a business. It was a place that cared for its people, that listened to them, and that saw them. Nina's story had sparked something deep within the company, and now it was becoming a beacon for others to follow. Months passed, and Nina continued to grow into her role. She had become more than just a mentor to the new employees. She had become a symbol of what it meant to overcome adversity. Her story, shared with the trainees, became a testament to the power of persistence and self-worth. One evening, as she finished her shift and walked out of the restaurant, Nina couldn't help but smile to herself. The once overwhelming weight on her shoulders had been replaced with a quiet strength. She had made it, not by asking for help, but by never giving up, no matter how hard it got. As she walked into the night, her steps were steady, and her heart was full. The world still had its challenges, but Nina knew that she could face them. She had faced the hardest battle of all, finding her place in a world that had forgotten her. And now, she was helping others do the same. Richard's initiatives had laid the foundation for a new kind of workplace, but it was Nina's resilience that had made it real. She was no longer the invisible girl in the corner. She was the leader, the mentor, the one who had shown that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. And as she turned the corner, walking into a future full of possibilities, Nina couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had not only changed her own life, she had helped change the lives of everyone who would walk through the doors of that restaurant from now on. It had been months since Nina had stepped into her new role as the first culinary fellow. She had grown comfortable in the kitchen, had found her rhythm, and was now flourishing in a way she had never imagined. She was no longer just the quiet dishwasher. She was a leader. Her influence spread beyond just the kitchen. She had become a quiet force within the restaurant's culture, ensuring that no one felt as invisible as she once had. One chilly evening, as she worked her usual shift, she noticed a familiar face at the door of the kitchen. It was Daniel, the manager from her first days at the restaurant, the same man who had hired her without any official paperwork, who had looked the other way while she worked for food. Nina didn't expect to see him again, especially not now, when things had changed so much. Daniel stood in the doorway, his hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jacket. He was alone, no colleagues or cameras in tow, just him and the soft hum of the kitchen in the background. For a moment, their eyes met, and Nina felt a flicker of unease. She put down the dish she was washing and walked toward him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. Daniel hesitated for a moment, his face unreadable. "I came to see how you're doing," he said, his words careful. "I've been hearing a lot about the changes around here. You've become something different, Nina." Nina gave a small smile but said nothing. She had heard enough about the changes from the other staff and trainees. Richard had made sure everyone knew what had happened. But this, seeing Daniel, the one who had let her work without pay, who had ignored her struggles, this was different. "I'm doing well," she replied. "Better than I ever thought possible." There was a long pause as Daniel shifted his weight uncomfortably. Finally, he spoke again, his tone softer than it had ever been before. "I want to apologize for everything. I didn't see you. I didn't notice what you were going through. And for that, I'm sorry." Nina nodded slowly, her gaze steady. "You didn't notice. That's the problem. But it's not just you. It's the whole system. People like me, we're invisible until something goes wrong." Her voice wavered slightly, but she kept her composure. "But you saw me now, and that's all that matters." Daniel looked down, ashamed, and Nina could feel his regret radiating off of him. She had no intention of making him feel guilty. After all, he was just a cog in a broken system. But it still felt good to hear the apology. "I'm glad you see it now," Nina added, her voice firm. "But it's more than just saying sorry. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. To anyone." Daniel left that night, but his visit left a lasting impression on Nina. She thought about what he had said, about the apology he offered. It wasn't that she had been waiting for it. It was the realization that even those who had once been blind could begin to see. Nina knew that the changes in the company were far from perfect. They were just the beginning. But now, with Richard's initiatives in place, more people were being given the opportunities they deserved. Managers, once complacent and disconnected, now had training to recognize when employees were struggling. The Emergency Housing Fund and culinary scholarships were just the start of a new era. And Nina was at the heart of it all, guiding others along the way. The days passed, and the restaurant's culture began to shift in profound ways. Employees, who had once been content to simply go through the motions, now took an active interest in their colleagues' well-being. The kitchen became a place of shared responsibility, a place where everyone had a voice, no matter their position. As Nina worked side by side with the new trainees, teaching them the skills they would need to succeed, she also shared her own journey. She told them about the long hours, the exhaustion, the loneliness, but also about the quiet strength she had found within herself, the strength that had gotten her through the darkest times. One day, while guiding a young trainee through the steps of preparing a dish, Nina noticed something that made her smile. The trainee was struggling, but she didn't give up. She asked questions, she tried again, and she smiled through her mistakes. "You're doing great," Nina said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Keep going. It's how we all learn." The trainee looked up at her with grateful eyes. "I've been working here for a few weeks, but it wasn't until you started talking to me that I felt like I belonged." Nina's heart swelled with pride. She had become what she had once longed for, a mentor, someone who could show others that they mattered, even in the toughest of circumstances. The restaurant was no longer just a place to work. It had transformed into a community where employees supported each other, where their struggles were acknowledged, and where their potential was nurtured. And at the center of it all stood Nina, a young woman who had come from nothing and had built something bigger than herself. As the months went by, the changes Richard had promised continued to ripple outward, touching every aspect of the company. Nina, now fully integrated into the leadership team, worked alongside Richard and the other managers to ensure that the company's values were upheld. But for Nina, the most important change wasn't the policies or the scholarships. It was the way people looked at each other now. It was the way they saw each other, not as workers or positions to fill, but as people. People with stories, struggles, and dreams. And Nina, who had once been invisible, had become a beacon for others to follow. Not because of anything she had asked for, but because she had never stopped believing in herself and in the power of change. As the restaurant chain grew, so did its challenges. The new programs were in place, but the world outside the kitchen was far from perfect. For Nina, the constant pressure to maintain the restaurant's new standards, while ensuring no one slipped through the cracks, began to take a toll. One particularly busy evening, as Nina was helping prepare dishes for a special event, she noticed the stress mounting on her colleagues. The kitchen was chaotic, the orders pouring in faster than they could be filled, and the stress on the staff was palpable. She watched as one of the new trainees, a young man with a nervous energy, began to falter under the pressure. His hands shook as he tried to chop vegetables, and Nina could see the panic in his eyes. Nina stepped in quickly, placing a hand on his shoulder to steady him. "Breathe," she said softly. "We've got this. Just take it one step at a time." But despite her best efforts, the tension in the kitchen grew. The once harmonious atmosphere was replaced by hurried movements and frustrated sighs. Nina could feel herself beginning to buckle under the weight of responsibility. She had been through so much to get to this point. Now, she was expected to hold everything together. Later that evening, as the last of the orders were cleared and the kitchen quieted down, Nina found herself alone in the back. Her apron was soaked with sweat, her muscles sore from the long hours. The exhaustion was more than physical, it was emotional. She had come so far, and yet, she was starting to question whether she could keep carrying the weight of this responsibility. Richard found her standing by the sink, staring at the pile of dishes that still needed to be washed. The usual spark in her eyes was missing. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Nina didn't answer right away. She just stared at the dishes, lost in thought. She felt like she was juggling too many things at once, too many people relying on her, too many eyes on her. She had become the face of change, but what if she wasn't strong enough to keep it all going? Richard waited, understanding the silent battle she was fighting. Finally, she spoke. "It's harder than I thought," Nina admitted, her voice low. "I'm trying to lead, to make sure everyone feels seen, but sometimes I don't know if I can keep up. What if I let them down?" Richard nodded, stepping closer. "You won't. You've come this far because you're strong, Nina. You've proven that. But no one can carry the weight of everything alone. Nina looked up at him, her eyes tired but full of determination. I don't want to fail them. You won't, Richard repeated, this time with more conviction. You're not alone in this. The company is built on more than just one person. It's built on all of us working together. And we'll make sure you have the support you need. Nina took a deep breath, letting the words settle in her chest. It wasn't just about her anymore. She had created a culture of care, and it was up to everyone to carry that forward. Richard's words reminded her that she didn't have to be the sole force behind the change. She had a whole team of people who believed in what they were doing. The next few weeks passed with a renewed sense of purpose. Nina had taken a step back to allow herself to recharge, leaning on her colleagues and fellow managers to share the load. The restaurant staff rallied behind her, as they had done from the beginning, ready to push through the difficult moments together. Nina began to see the difference in how the team interacted with one another. There was a new openness in the kitchen, a sense of camaraderie that had never been there before. Employees were checking in on each other, helping each other during the rushes, and making sure no one felt isolated. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when the pressure felt unbearable, when the weight of leadership threatened to crush her. But Nina no longer felt alone. She had built something bigger than herself, a community that wasn't just about food, but about people. One afternoon, as Nina was overseeing the prep for a new menu, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was the young trainee from months ago, the one who had struggled during the busy evening. He was now working confidently, his hands moving swiftly as he prepared ingredients, his energy no longer frantic but calm. He caught Nina's eye and smiled. I just wanted to thank you. You were right. I kept going, and I feel like I've learned so much since then. It's because of what you said that I'm here today. Nina's heart warmed. It was moments like this, small but significant, that reminded her why she had fought so hard for change. She had created a space where people didn't just survive, they thrived. The restaurant continued to evolve, and Nina's role became more than just that of a culinary fellow. She was now part of the leadership team, working closely with Richard to shape the future of the company. The programs that had been introduced were now a permanent fixture in the company's values, and their success was visible in every restaurant. But for Nina, the most important thing was the culture she had helped build. The work ethic, the values of care and compassion, and the commitment to making sure no one felt invisible. These were the things that would carry the company forward. As she stood in the kitchen, watching the new trainees working side by side with seasoned chefs, Nina couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had been the quiet girl in the back, invisible to everyone. But now, she was the one who made sure no one else had to feel that way. She smiled to herself, knowing that her journey wasn't just about becoming a culinary leader. It was about making sure everyone who walked through the restaurant doors knew that they mattered. And that, she thought, was the true heart of the kitchen.